Exist out here, man. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerd and nerdettes. Now, as 2024 comes to an end, you have a chance to look back over the content you've created over the year and pick out some of the things that were most enjoyable to do or most surprising results. And with the weapons test, there's no shortage of that. So I want to take a moment to go over my top 10 favorite tests that I've done this year, the most surprising results, the best results. Just kind of show those to you, because with YouTube, you never know what people get to see or what people don't get to see. So I'm going to share those in a succinct little way, my top 10 tests of 2024. Are you going to have that the whole time? Yes, this is stupid and I hate it. I mean, it's not even that bad. And my umbrella just broke. Wow. Ugh, such a baby sometimes. Starting at number 10, we have pilum power. Now, there can be times when you expect a result to happen, but are still amazed when it does. I obviously knew that the pilum was made to penetrate against wooden shields and armor, but the dramatic effect that it had and the difference it had between the spear and the actual pilum was truly amazing to me. You can really see the engineering behind it, how much design and function it had. And when I did the test against the wooden shield, and that wooden shield has been through a lot, if you followed me long enough, you know that it has held up to really heavy duty impact. It just went through like it was nothing. And so for me, that was a really good test, because wood, unlike a lot of steels and things like that, is relatively easy to replicate historically. You know, that one's multi-layered, so it's a lot stronger and sturdier than a single piece of wood. And so that to me is a good one-to-one, and you can really see how it would be so devastating in the time, because the shields really were the primary source of defense for a lot of people in the front line. And if you lost that ability, or someone had the ability to go straight through that shield, or if it got stuck inside that shield and you couldn't take it, had to drop the shield, you're going to be completely exposed to all the enemies. And so that was really cool to me. But the reason I rank it at number 10 is because I expected the result, but I didn't expect that dramatic a fashion. And so that still was one of the best things I've seen this year. Just going through that shield after all I've put it through the boss and the wood, was truly astounding, and that's gonna be high up there. At number 9, it was breaking bows for science. Now, I've broken bows before, I've broken strings before, I've had arrows break when I release, but I've never intentionally gone out with a damaged bow to try and break it to film the results. So I was very trepidatious about this, even armored up and kitted up with glasses and everything. It's a really nerve-wracking experience. This video also was the kind of the start of the character creation, so to say. So it was kind of near and dear to me in that way, because that's when I started getting a little creative, having a little more fun, and creating, you know, characters to banter off each other. And the results were what I expected. The fails were dramatic. It was still extremely scary to do. I've done a lot of silly things on this channel, but that by far was the one where I was most apprehensive about. And so just doing it was a huge mental obstacle for me and a hurdle, but the results were good. And I think I had a fun time kind of showing what to do and what not to do with archery to create it in a way that has some real impacts and some real consequences if you don't. Number 8 was putting myself through hell for science. Now, in YouTube, there's a lot of sameness when it comes to content, whether it's gun content, medieval content, movie content, whatever. A lot of people produce very similar things, very similar tests for that matter. And this was the first one I felt like I was able to create something that I hadn't seen before. The premise of this test was simple. I basically covered myself in all the plate that I had. It was about 60, 70 pounds. I had the padded gamison, I had the leggings, I had all the armor and the helmet. And it was a day that was 115 degrees, or about like 40, 41 degrees Celsius. My goal was to stay out here for about 2 hours, be active, film the video, do some sword tests, whatever, to make it interesting, but see how much that affected my ability. Of course, of the video, it was really jarring just how difficult it was to even breathe, because the helmet would get really hot. And so you would have a difficult time because it's like you were breathing in a furnace in there. So I couldn't really get respiration well. I was getting lightheaded. My heart rate, once I started, it stayed at about 130 through the whole video, even when I was being relatively sedentary. And so it was truly just a good way to appreciate how difficult. I am in an extremely hot climate. Of course, in the Crusades, during that time, they wouldn't have had the same plate. A lot of times it was mail, cloth over the mail, things like this. So this wasn't really reminiscent of a particular time in history where there was like a record-breaking temperature on a specific day. It was more just about how much wearing armor affects you in what would be extreme heat. And so it was a really difficult thing to do. I think of things that I've done, it was one of the hardest. I almost quit multiple times. I was like checking my watch to make sure my heart rate wasn't going too high, make sure I wasn't getting too lightheaded. But it was extremely taxing. An appreciation for the difficulty that it would have been, especially having a full face visor. Seeing how people would honestly just give up on occasion in a battle. You'd think, oh man, they'd never quit, but your body can't function anymore, and all you can think about is stopping and resting and getting in the shade. There's any combat sport where, like with jiu-jitsu, where I'd go in there, you come in fresh and you feel great, and then you're like 3 rounds in and someone's on top of you, they're heavier than you, and you just are like, I need to tap. Like, he doesn't even have any submission, but you start to break down mentally. You just want to get out of that situation. And this demonstrated it to me in a very real way how brutal and difficult that would have been in that time, and how tough you had to be to manage that. At number 7, it was ancient bows versus modern armor. Now, this was the most popular, so to say, video I have done so far. I don't know why. I don't think there's anything overly special about it, but it also was the first time I introduced Sergeant Alpha Bro. And that is an extremely fun person to create. I created him basically off of all the comments I get that are like, I consider to be Alpha Bro comments. And I just kind of channeled that into one character. But the results were as expected for the soft armor, because obviously 3A or even 3A plus is not going to stop an arrow. It's not designed for that. The Kevlar helmet definitely surprised me. It did a lot better than I had anticipated with the heavy bows and the bodkin tips. So that was pretty thrilling to see real time, and just a fun experiment to create. And then the level 4 ceramic plate obviously didn't do anything to it, just completely obliterated the arrows. Really didn't scratch the surface much. I didn't expect it to do anything, so those arrows were just kind of thrown away. But that was a video I feel like where I started to get really creative and learn a little bit more about editing, and learning a little bit more about how to try and create things in a fun way to watch and observe. And that was the start, I think, of me spending more time on the back end with the filming, and also scripting things out more, because I had a lot of different characters in that video bantering off each other. And that's when I was like, all right, I need to start writing things down. But overall, the star of that show was the bows, and that's my favorite thing, is going to be showing off the power of old school bows and the relevancy they still have to do a lot of damage, even though, of course, they're not going to be on the battlefield, but they still have a lot to give. And even though it's just a piece of wood and string, it can still throw something real hard, real fast. In at number 6, we have the sling versus the ballistic dummy. Now, this was done earlier in the year where I was still figuring out a lot of editing and pacing and volume, let's say, so things were not great. This was, early attempts, and I was still figuring out, but the results were definitive. And I'll say this quite a bit in this video, but armor is hard to replicate at a budget cost. When I had the Roman armor against the sling, it's not a great representation of what that would be. It's a mild steel. Roman armor had more iron in it. It was harder. So obviously I caved it in, but that's not a good historical example of what would happen. The ballistic dummy, however, is a pretty good one-to-one for what a skull would be. So seeing the effects of the rock hitting the face and knocking the teeth out and hitting the side of the head even, and cracking that skull and basically causing damage to the brain was impressive in the sense where you can see how devastating that weapon would be in that time frame, and how getting hit with something like that would be horrible, because not only would you be concussed and cause damage, it would shatter the bone. So it splintered it, right? When I went into the dummy, you could see all the layers. That's not something you can recover from, and not something you can meld together. The other thing about the sling is it's one of my passion projects, but I always feel bad putting videos with it, because even though I'm passionate about it and I work hard with it, I'm still a pale shadow of what people used to be from back in the day. Maybe I'm like at a child's level. There's obviously more to be gained from that, and as I practice more and get better with it, hopefully I can give a better historical example of what a skilled slinger would do. But as for now, even me being what would be considered a novice in the day, you can see how devastating of a weapon that is and how cool of a tool that is. And I'm just happy to give it a little more light, because I'm not the best slinger on the internet, but people get excited about it and I love to perform with it. Number 5 would have to be warbow versus crossbow with administrative results. Now, administrative results was the first person who really pushed me into the forefront and gave me a little bit of traction with YouTube. He was generous enough to invite me on his channel when I did the 165-pound warbow. And then when he got the crossbow, I reached out to him like, man, that looks amazing. And he said, do you want to come out? So of course I went out there, and we had a great time. When he and I get together, it's just fun and banter and laughter. And the results were great, because the warbow did outperform against a 600-pound goat-foots crossbow and everything. I got to use that as well, but we did a speed test, a feet per second test, a distance test, and we tested the penetration power against the Brigandine. And the warbow, the 165, outperformed that in everything. So it was great to see. You could definitely see how it was a nominal difference. The crossbow still did very well. It was similar in distance and speed, but the amount of time it takes to train with the warbow versus that, it really shows why it was such a prolific weapon, because you really could put it in the hands of an everyman and they'd have the ability to match what takes a lifetime to accomplish. So that was a very fun historical test where we really got to put two weapons of the period up against each other and see how they were, and just, it was like a living history test. That was a really, really great one, and I was grateful for the opportunity to go out there and just play. You know, this whole channel is just playing, and I love every minute of it. Number 4 has to be warbow versus hardened steel. Now, it's difficult to get accurately replicated materials. They are expensive, and with this being something just as a fun gig, I don't spend a lot of money on all the equipment that I have, so a lot of them steel is mild steel. It's not a perfect representation of what the armor was, but this was when I first got to work with Dequeatum. And if you're not familiar with Dequeatum, I talk about him all the time on the channel. He is an amazing duelist. He crafts armor, and he was able to give me some hardened steel to test against the bow. So this was one where I set it up all the night before I got up there. I was so excited, and the results of the warbow were great. You could completely see the difference between like the mild steel that I have versus the hardened steel. Once I got up to 1 millimeter, I was still able to punch into it, but when I got to the 1.5, you could see there was no chance that any of those were going to go through and into that armor. So that was the most historically accurate of the armor tests with the bow that I have been able to accomplish, and it was just something that I was thrilled to see, because I really was just, I didn't know what was going to happen. I've seen it done on other channels and you can expect something to happen, but until you go out and actually perform it yourself and see what occurred, actually take the time to use proper equipment of the period and compare it against itself, how those results were going to be. So I really got a good idea, I feel, of what a knight would feel with that, the protections they had, and the capability of the heavy bows that I have against good quality armor. So that was great, and also kind of created the friendship I have with Dequeatum now, where we really enjoy, we chat back and forth here and there, and he's just a great guy. And so that holds a special place in my heart, because it created a really good friendship there that I have going forward now. Now, number 3 is going to be the sling versus the lenothorax. Now, this holds a special place in my heart for a couple reasons. One, because I've formed a friendship with Fateful Force. He's a great YouTuber, a good guy, and he built the lenothorax to the specs of the time. Now, again, as I stated in the video, there's debate whether or not it was glued or quilted or how it was put together, but either way, it was 29 layers of linen. I tested it with both, and he was kind enough to send it to me. Not only did he send that to me, he also sent me the lead shot. And I had never used lead shot before, so that was a really great opportunity to try and see how I performed with something that was more analogous to what was used. You know, you can use rock, you can use clay, you can use river rock, you can use whatever. So that's the great thing about a sling. But having shaped lead that would be period appropriate for the time with the proper weight was a privilege, because I felt like I got to reenact something historically, which is not something I feel like I always get to do well on this channel. Some things are better reproductions of other, but linen, linothorax, that is easier to replicate, and with the lead shot I was able to do it. The reason why it's not number one, honestly, is because I didn't have a good way to gauge the damage. A lot of people after the video said you should put some building clay behind it, or even like a dummy behind it, but those things are, you know, a little bit more, maybe next year or so. That was the one thing that kind of pushed it down a little bit, because if I would have had a better thing to absorb the impact and show the damage behind that armor, I think that would have been a great way to see how effective that was against that armor. But even with that, taking those hits and the damage, you can see that it starts to cave in a little bit. And if it was quilted, you're not gonna have that hardness. It's gonna cause a lot of pressure and a lot of damage, and that would not be enjoyable. Number two is my boy Rambro versus hardened steel. Now, like I said before, there's not a lot of times I'm overly surprised on the channel. This video is special for a couple reasons. One, APA Archery was kind enough to send me a 100-pound compound bow to test. Now, I got some grief from people for using my fingers, but I talked to the maker of the bow and he said, that's fine if you can do it. So just so you know, that's okay. The second thing was Bishop Archery sent me 5 arrows to test. Now, those arrows are really expensive. They are custom made for each individual one, and he was generous enough just to send me those because he wanted to see what has happened. He was a fan of what I did, and he said, I'd love to see the results. The third thing was that it was Dequitum's armor, and that made it super awesome. Now, the thing that shocked me was the 1.5 millimeter hardened steel. When it punched through that, just about all the way in. And that honestly floored me. I mean, you can probably see in the video, I was genuinely giddy with what happened. I did not see that coming. And it's just something that totally surprised and shocked me. And there was no better way to final or end that compound bow series than with that, because that was a definitive puncture. It punched through. It was insane. Because that was a definitive result, and it went through, and I sent a picture to Dequitum after I did it, and I said, dude, check this out. And he's like, no effing way. And I was like, yeah. And so then he filmed his little part for the video so we could kind of do it together. And it was just, the whole thing was amazing, and I had a great time doing that one. That's gonna be number 2 because I was so surprised, so shocked, and a lot of people helping me put that video together. My number 1 favorite test and video that I did for the entire year is going to have to be the collaborations I did with arts. I've met few people in this world who are willing to go as crazy and as hard as me, and art was one where we fed off each other. Everything we did was going as hard as we could. We did some scripted fights, but most of them were just improvised in the moment. The weapons were real, you know, and we were just going at it. But my favorite test that we did that was just crazy that he was like, yeah, let's do it, was the shield break with the arrows, where I shot the arrows into the shield and snapped it. When we did that test, originally I was gonna kind of say, hey, I'll set it up so it's gonna look a certain way and we have it here and then you can break it. And he's like, well, can you hit this spot right here, which was on the right corner, right? So that shield is a front grip. So the hand's right here. And so there's no other surrounding areas. It's not like this, it's right in here. He's like, well, can you hit that spot right here? I was like, yeah, I can hit it. And he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna be behind the shield. I was like, okay, man. So he set it up, we put it up here like this. I used bodkin tips that weren't super sharp. I dulled them down. And he just stood there and just took that shot with no trepidation or fear whatsoever. And then when he came and broke it, it was just crazy to see. And so we did a lot of crazy stuff, you know, shooting the sword out of your hand, the shield charge as well. And so those are some of those things where when we got together, it was just constant chaos and fun, and we were like, well, let's try this, and we just fed off each other with these outlandish things we'd seen in movies and cinema and TV, and just tried to replicate it to the best of our ability out here. And so that was the one right there. That was my number 1 video of 2024. So as we go into 2025, I have a lot of fun stuff planned in my head. If there's a combination of weapons and armor I haven't done that you guys want to see, please let me know. But also, I just want to say this is the last video I'm going to do for the year. I'm going to be on vacation with my family for like a week and a half, so I'm going to be gone. Won't have my phone with me really, so you guys comment. I usually pride myself in always responding back and everything, but I'm not going to be able to do that because I'm not going to have my phone with me. It's going to be, you know, family time, what have you. So I just want to give this as my final send off for the year. I look forward to seeing you guys in 2025. I hope it's great, and you guys have a great new year.